Prime Video. You people will not ruin things for me. What did I say? You not ruin things for me. Guys, let me tell you, the last few weeks, I have just not wanted to do this. These people are trying to kill my love for this, right? Because the way they've been dumping, I want to say content, but it's our movies, you know what I mean? But just treating it like content, the way they're just dumping stuff on the platform, and it gets to where there's so much you don't even know where to begin. You're watching so many movies, you're like, which one am I going to review now? You know, so it's been a struggle, but I'm trying to get back with it. I'm trying to get back into the thick of things, but man, it's been very frustrating. But they will not succeed. What did I say? They failed. They failed. Today we're reviewing A Green Fever. It's streaming on Prime Video after a really good festival run last year. The genre is crime drama, sometimes action drama. It's also been described as a thriller, so I guess depending where you look. The writer is Isaac Ayodeji and the director is Taiwo Egunjobi. For a synopsis, it says, things get unnerving when a suave, some people say suave, but I don't think that's how it's pronounced. When a suave realtor, or we say it however you like. Pearl roll, start again. Synopsis. Things get unnerving when a suave realtor and his sick daughter take refuge in a mysterious mansion after a medical emergency in the middle of nowhere. All right, what are my general thoughts about this movie coming in? Upon entering this movie, I could immediately see why it was popular in the festival. And you know, I came in just very expectant, so stay with me. Let's see if my optimism was justified and or rewarded. Guys, before I get into it, please remember to like this video and then please share. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. Turn on your notifications so you can see my videos when I post. You know, just please be generous to me. This takes a lot of work. I do it gladly. I do it willingly. I love doing this, but it is a lot of work, and the only reward I get is actually eyes, you know, on these videos, so it doesn't feel like I'm screaming into a void. You know, when you engage with the content, it helps with the algorithm, you know, so my videos are pushed forward and more people can see them, etc, etc, etc. I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you. Now let's get straight into it. What worked? 3 things I love most about this movie. I'm just gonna tell you. Number 1, William Benson. Number 2, William Benson. And number 3, William Benson. Okay, I kid. What did I like about this movie? Number 1, cast and performances. The cast was good. You know, of course, the most impressive being William Benson. I already said he played the role of Colonel Bashiru. Guys, do you know if he's had a name change? Because on all the material I've seen on screen, on IMDb, elsewhere, I've seen his name listed as William Chinoyenem. And if he's had a name change, if anyone knows, please tell us so that we can refer to him with the proper name or the name that he prefers or whatever, so that's respectful. So he was perfect. This actor is vastly experienced. I first experienced him in the TV series on African Magic Unbroken, and there he played the role of General Ape. It was a terrible character, but he was so convincing that since then I've watched him. Even there in An Epic, he had the same great courage, the same commanding presence that he always has. So whether he's in An Epic, whether he's in a period piece or a contemporary piece, whatever it is, he comes correct all the time. He's such a fabulous actor. William Benson is, or William Chinoyenem. Not very long ago, I saw him in Obaram, we all did, and he was wasted there. So I was very happy to see him have like such an important role in this movie, and actually that was the number 1 reason why I watched this movie. I would have watched it regardless. Now in this role, he was able to show, you know, his range and his acting chops by playing this role of a very temperamental and capricious character, Colonel Bashiru. So he was a joy to watch, right? The next actor I'd like to talk about is Temilolu Fosudo. I'm sorry, I know that I'm not saying this name right. I'm usually quite good with names, but I don't think I'm getting this one right. Temilolu Fosudo. Well, he played the role of Kumi Braithwaite, and he was one of the key characters, and he's a really competent actor. I enjoy him most of the time, but I'm not sure that I liked him as much here, right? So this character, because of the kind of sort of subterfuge they were trying to like play on the surface while things were going on underneath. He had this wide-eyed look or expression that made me immediately suspicious and wary. So I don't know if that was intentional, but it put me on guard immediately, so I don't know if I enjoyed him as much here, but just generally he is a really good actor. Ruby Okezie, I'm gonna say that she was okay. The styling, the color, the choice, the choices that were made for her and all of that, everything was done to depict this like innocence. I'm not going to go so far as to say virginal, but she was wearing white the entire time until the very end, and all of that like carried into like the cadence of her voice and delivery. So I'll say she did the job like quite well. She was okay. I didn't find the character again especially convincing, but it was not off-putting. It was just, I guess, what it needed to be, right? Sometimes the actors can only do as much as they're given to do, honestly. And she does remind me of Mbong Amata, and I hope she shows up again on our screens, because it's been, I don't know, you guys might remember her from Amazing Grace, and I think was it Black October or November or whatever the hell Jetta Amata was having that woman doing. But I want to see her like in roles that would give her opportunity. Why am I talking about Mbong? This is about Ruby Okezie. She's fantastic. We also had our favorite girl, Darasimi Nadi. She was fine here. This is another person from Obaram, and it's really great to see how this little girl is growing up right before our eyes, becoming more and more comfortable in front of the camera. This was great, but in this particular movie, she was given like next to nothing to do, which is such a shame and such a waste. It was also good to see Demi briefly, Demi Okanlawo. He looked good for the few seconds we saw him. I'm not gonna say he was wasted here. When you see a big character like that given a small role like this, is deliberate. But all in all, as far as the cast, William Benson was the one who had, like, I would say, the most notable performance. The look and feel of this movie. Everything I say here, well, most of the things I say here will have a few qualifiers, but let's go. This was a good looking film. As far as the mood and the tone and all of that, the feel that they were going for, I'll say that they acquitted themselves quite well. So let's just go straight into production design. I'll say the production design mostly got it right on many fronts. The cinematography was quite good. It did feel really intentional, which is something I like to see. This seemed like deliberate decisions were made, and I enjoyed that. So there was just, I would say, a general sense of competence. The lighting was good up to an extent. That's a qualifier there, but it was good. The set design, the coloring, the costume, etc., captured, just the period or historic feel that the movie was going for, and just so did the general tone of this movie. So as far as, that's what I mean when I say it was a good looking film, not in a glaring way, kind of like Breath of Life, but this was for the contained and for the budget and all of that it was. I think it looked great, and also for what it was going for, I thought it was perfect. Honestly, this movie was a one location movie, and I've got to applaud them because they made very good use of that. And so instead of the space feeling small and cramped and budgety, it did feel dynamic. The way they were able to utilize that space also was really, really great. And so it was low budget, but it did not look cheap. Let's get to the story, my favorite part. It was a pretty simple story. What can I say? A thief stealing from another thief. That's it pretty much. That was the story. It did get some things right as far as the story. There was good suspense, and they were able to maintain the tension just by keeping you wondering. We know something is about to happen, but what is that something? And so that was quite good. So we had, it was going at a very slow pace, and people acting shady, especially Kumi Braithwaite's character acting shady. So you knew that things were happening under the surface, and that something also epic or whatever was fixing to happen. You just weren't sure what. So I would say also that the wool was successfully pulled over our eyes with the coup, and that was really good misdirection, because they let us think that this was all about the coup, and then the main story or the main event or whatever was playing out under the surface. And I thought that was a brilliant idea. Whether or not it was executed well, that's another matter entirely. So anyway, when the twist / reveal / what the movie was really about or the story was did manifest, it was definitely surprising. I'll give it that. There was some pretty good good breadcrumbing and just some good foreshadowing as well. So when that happens, it's where in retrospect some things that were said or some events just make sense. So for instance, when Kumi, when he first came and he was asking how many people lived in the house, you would clock it as that is a weird question, but not so glaring that you would be like, and hyper focus on that. And also the way he reacted to seeing the person who was his entry point, the way he reacted to seeing him tortured. At first, when we saw that, we thought it was just a reaction to just a human reaction to seeing somebody suffering, but later we found out that it was much more than that. Finally, let me just say that I like the story that was intended, the story that I think I could see under the tangle and fog. I'm just going to say that I like the story that was intended. And with all of that said, this ushers us into the next section, which is what did not work. There were a few technical details that stood out as, this could have been better. The soundtrack, like I've already said, it worked until it didn't. It started out ushering us into this world with this ominous tone. Helped us get acclimated to what kind of story we're in. But then it stayed ominous even when that was not warranted, and so eventually I got tired of that and it ruined it for me. The cinematography, I think it could have been better. There were a few shots that were just sloppy and framed improperly. The lighting was inconsistent. As far as setting the mood and the tone and all that, it was adequate, but there were also times when, depending on where you are within the building, it would look like it was day or it would look like it was the middle of the night, and that was unsettling, but not in a way that felt intentional. Well, now that we have all that out of the way as far as the technical details that bothered me, let's get to what I always care about the most, which is what? The story. Yep, that's always for me. Like I said, I liked the story that was intended, whatever that was. I just know that there was a different story. However, I did not much like the one that we got. First of all, it was too slow to begin. Nothing happened for a good chunk of this movie, and yet it did not feel like slow burn, which I like. I love slow burn. In fact, at some point, I would have appreciated some burn in this movie, to be honest. This one was just going at, rather than burn, which is hot, this was cold. Like the pace was glacial, so I was just tired of this movie. There's a point that I ask myself in every movie I'm watching, that if I wasn't doing this to do a review, would I continue? And when the answer is no, that tells me all I need to know about the movie. The protagonist was passive, right? For a huge chunk of this movie, Kumi Braithwaite did nothing. Yeah, he showed up with his daughter, that was active. He used her to gain entry, that was active. And then a whole chunk of nothing. Because if you try to summarize this movie, you will have the beginning and the end clearly sketched, but the middle will be, so what exactly was happening? I don't know. His snooping, he seemed more committed to keeping up the misdirection, that's the cool distraction. But the casualty of that was that as far as the story, the main event, he ended up not doing much with regards to why he was really there. So in retrospect, you're like, so what exactly did he do? And by the time he became active at the end, honestly, I did not much care. It was like he'd just been moving through this house, and the next thing, he grabs his daughter and tries to make his escape. And for this kind of movie, I do understand why for a chunk of it, he wasn't doing anything active. However, there could have been other things that they could have done with the characters within that space to keep it, to make it feel like it was moving forward and not just we're treading water. Instead, we just had this lackluster dialogue whenever people were talking. These interactions between the characters felt forced. At some point, it looked like the same scene over and over again, and I'm taking this directly from something somebody said in Nollywood Film Club. You could check out the podcast, it's on Spotify. All right, back to this. So for a long time, nothing was happening, and then all of a sudden, the colonel just turned verbose, and all of a sudden he couldn't say too much or reveal too much, and then that's when we now had all this exposition.
He says what I pay him to say.
Only trying to prevent another miscarriage.
I paid him to make the miscarriages happen.
Tell me more. Why is he just, verbal diarrhea all of a sudden? So it's the way his character turned, that was just, and that brings me actually to my next point about the characters, which was that there was not much character building. The characters were unknown and unknowable. If we don't know these people, it's hard to care, how can we care? There were no real character arcs, no one changed, no character journey or anything. So honestly, it was hard to care. So speaking of plot, the coup plotting was not very convincing. Starting with how much time was allocated. When we came in, the corner was talking about 72 hours. Coups happened very quickly in order for them to be successful. But also, as far as this movie, a tighter timeline would have done wonders for pacing and keeping up the tension, knowing that all of these things are happening in a very compressed space. There's a coup happening in 24 hours or 12 hours, and at that very time, this man is wandering in with a sick child or whatever it is. Like, what? But has it 72 hours? Yeah, plenty of time for them to give the girl water and for her to rest if that's what they need, and then they go, and that's kind of the end of it. So that really did not help, just allocating that much time. But also, just the depiction of a coup in progress did not feel convincing, and it just felt like if there really was a coup, it was bound to fail. There were too many little inconsistencies here and there, and then there were also too many unanswered questions. Who was this child, and what was their history as a thieving pair? How was she so comfortable wielding that gun like that? The way she carried it very casually. More importantly, why was this child Ireti so underutilized? They just had her faking illness and like sleeping the entire time, and I think that if they had utilized her, I made a joke on Twitter. I said if you play God of War, they could have used her like Atreus. They could have used her more because it looks like they're a tag team. The stakes also made no sense to me. Like, of all places to rob, why a colonel's house? And that's not a problem in and of itself. The reason it was a problem is because we don't know Kumi at all. We don't understand his character in order for us to be able to say, because some people are high-risk individuals, they hire the risk, they hire the excitement, they hire the reward. But we don't know this guy, we don't know his history, we don't know his profile, we don't know his character, we don't know his antecedent, so we don't know why. And because of that, it just fell flat for me. Here are a few details relating to, I would say, anachronism, because this movie is a period piece, right? And for this, I have my partner, and that's my husband, to thank for this. He nerds out on this stuff. So he immediately, we started talking about this movie, he just hit me with all the historical facts. First of all, for a period piece, what period though? Here are a few details that threw the timeline thither and yon. The army uniform was from the 1960s. Matilda's look, her styling, was early 70s. Kumi's look and styling was early 80s, right? And then Kumi also is naming artists from the 80s, specifically references a record that came out in 1989. So that's already like 3 to 4 decades, right? And then we had a curfew as a result of riots caused by fuel scarcity. Fuel scarcity started in Nigeria in 1991, and the first ever fuel scarcity riot was in 1992. Oop, that's another decade. So this is now officially 4 decades that this movie has straddled. You may not care about this stuff, and you might be like, hey, it doesn't really matter, but look, our anyhowness is anyhow, okay? Like, if you are going to do a period piece, the least you can do is to just commit to doing some sort of research. Also, before I leave this subject, the way they discussed making records, and again, my husband is into records, like this is the business he has done since I met him. There was a time I was even his quote-unquote assistant and used to help him. Anyway, he's into records, so he should know. So when Kumi tells Matilda, you need to go back to the studio, it's like, it doesn't work like that. And then when Colonel Bashiru breaks her record and she goes, hey, I was still working on that. That's not how it works. When you see a record, it's finished. It's not like some digital kind of recording where, oh, you record and then we say play it again or whatever it is. When it's recorded, it's done. Also, it was extremely expensive to make these records, and they weren't made like 1 copy, 2 copy, like when he broke down, I said, oh, you broke my record. It's like they are made in the thousands, and really expensive. So, but the way they spoke about this was spoken about in very modern terms. So it ended up feeling like just vibes, like they just wanted, oh, let's talk about records because it's the most period of period things. Then they went for it. But, let's not even bother to commit to the research. And what's ironic is that the writer describes, because I read an interview where he describes himself and the director as history buffs. So, that made this doubly curious. But let me not go on and on about that. Also, as far as Matilda, how did she even do it? How did she leave the house to go do these record sessions? I'm not even sure about like what that situation or arrangement is. Can she leave? Because it looks like she's kind of imprisoned there, and then who would sponsor these studio sessions and the records and all of that? So that left just a lot of questions, and then, just moving on from that, the action scenes towards the end were just not great, and then the resolution was not convincing. This movie looked like it could have been a short film. I would not be surprised if it started out as a short film and then it ended up being a feature film. So that's the end of what did not work. But before I leave this part, let me just say that there were some things that were just confusing. How and why did Kumi Braithwaite trust Matilda so completely? You know, was he that sure of himself? Is that why they described him as suave? You know, like all his, oh, let me help you with your music. Did he trust that much that he thought that whatever he did with her in the space of a few hours would overcome years of conditioning, trauma bonding with the colonel to the extent that she would betray the colonel over him? That was a lot for me. What is this green fever? I can't believe that we did not even talk at all about this group. But first of all, before even talking about whatever it is or isn't, which is honestly not really important, as far as how it played into the plot, why would you allow strangers carrying someone who is infected with such a serious disease come into your house, first of all on a good day, but also bring the complication of contagion into the middle of plotting a coup? I don't know, that didn't really make sense. They could have found another excuse to bring her into the house, but then the movie would not be called a green fever. And speaking of that, here's some trivia. Green fever is actually a term used to describe withdrawal from weed, marijuana. The symptoms are feeling hot, cold flashes, restlessness, and on and off sweating, nausea, etc. I would say, you know, you understand how that feels, but I'm sure some of you are smoking weed and you're not planning to quit. So how would you know how withdrawal feels like? What is wrong with me? I'm hungry. That's my only excuse. Green fever is also a term used to describe someone who loves money too much. And I think this is the usage they intended for this movie. But I feel like they could have played around a bit with that, because ultimately this movie was about greed, right? So I think they should have found a way to tie it in firmly as a metaphor, not just left it floating and so esoteric, because I had to do research to figure out, is there something called green fever? And that's where I found out about this withdrawal and then also about this term. But if people don't know, then it's lost, and I'm going to make bold to say it's lost to majority of people who watch this movie. In conclusion, this movie was ambitious. I'm going to say that, and I'm also going to say that its heart was in the right place. It got many things right. It did do many things right, but in the end it still fell short, right? And I'm not going to lie, it just was not a very interesting watch. It did not use many of the opportunities that it itself created, which to me is always such a waste and such a shame. Some character backstories would have been nice in order for us to understand motivation and even care about these people. So in the end, it didn't quite come together for me. It ended up being about nothing. If you ask me what was the statement of this movie, I guess if you say in the end they both killed themselves, which means greed does not pay, I guess you could say that's something for a message or a lesson. But honestly, it did not feel like it was about much. There was no one and nothing to root for or to care about. I didn't care about even the little girl. I didn't care about her. I did not know her. She was just sleeping. Matilda, I didn't care about her, and I can't even begin to tell you why. And so ultimately, I don't like the writing. If you can't get me to care about the story, to care about the characters, to care about actions, you know, and whatever, then, or consequences or whatever, then it means I don't like the writing. So I feel like this movie was going for a claustrophobic experience, you know, but it just felt more like I was standing in a flood, you know, that was just moving me slightly here and there, but not really committing to drowning me. I read in an interview where the writer described how some of the ideas were conceived, and reading that interview, it all made sense because there was sort of a patchwork process to it. Fabrics borrowed from different cloths and then put together. But while a patchwork is intended to look that way, I fear that the concept did not quite translate here, because the journey from, I think, intention to result were just oceans apart. I'd like to applaud this filmmaker though for the effort and encourage them to keep pushing. They're not a first time or even second time filmmaker, but we can all stand to get better, right? They definitely, like I said, got a lot of things right here. I don't particularly recommend this movie. Now, as far as my rating, I'm working on a system for rating movies. When I was conceiving of this channel, I had an idea and then I got distracted, and now I'm trying to bring myself back to creating my own formula. So I'll probably have it ready by my next video. All right, guys. That's it for A Green Fever. Thank you so much for staying with me to the end. I assume you're still here and I'm not just talking to myself. Be sure please to like this video, to drop a comment. Please let me hear your thoughts. Check out my other videos. I really appreciate it when you do that. Don't forget the algorithm, YouTube algorithm, okay? I'll be watching and likely reviewing a newly released film on YouTube. So if I do review it, that will be my first YouTube movie. That's a whole different world out there. It's a whole different ecosystem. I've been getting some push, to explore that world. I'll try, especially with Prime doing as it's doing. So the movie is titled Wrong Side of Love, and I've heard good things about it, so we'll see. So go ahead and watch it. I'm going to have a link for it in the description below, so I encourage you to watch it so that you'll be ready for my review if and when I do review it. What else do I have to say? I think I'm done. So guys, you have the right to an incredible viewing experience, so never settle. Thank you.